Yeah, well, I mean, what
So
the reasons obviously you you took to heart because 3 years ago this month, almost to the week, maybe to the week, you showed up and I got a message from you, text message saying you were showing up in Lviv with a group of British grunts, and then a few days later I saw you in Kiev. So, and as
yeah,
I
yeah,
as we said, not inaccurately, you were one of the plaque holders of the Mozart Group. I mean, right at the beginning, with the Russians knocking on the gates, and we were setting up that what at the time seemed a hopelessly inadequate training course for for these guys,
yeah.
IT workers, students, kids. Remember
Was that the
who?
5 day one?
Yeah, it was like 5 days, if that, right, Nate? I mean, it was it was
I
constantly.
can't do somewhere between 3 and 5 days. Nowhere near enough.
If you sleep hot at night, you know just how disruptive it can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all of the above. That's where GhostBed can help. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, cooling pillows, and even cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts with your body temperature, every Ghost Bed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips, or a firmer option with exceptional support, your Ghost Bed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a Ghost Bed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out your mattress for a 101 nights risk-free and make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping and most items ship within 24 hours. If you're not sure which Ghost Bed is for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions and get your personalized recommendation, or reach out to their friendly team of sleep experts for all the help you need. Even better, Team House listeners can get 50% off site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/house and use code HOUSE at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/house with code HOUSE at checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide. And if you're not in the market for a mattress, check out their pillows, their bedding. They have all kinds of great stuff there. So thanks to GhostBed, and check them out.
We have eyes on. Roger.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On. Here with Andy Milburn and Nate Vance and myself. Nate Vance, you might have heard he's been in the news a little bit. Former Marine, of course, because we can't go at one show without having at least one former Marine on the show. Uh, he's been spent the last few years in Ukraine, fighting with the Ukrainian military, part of the Davinci Wolves battalion. He was involved early on in Mozart. That's how Andy got to know him. And Nate, thanks for coming on the show, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
You
Nick,
know,
great
it
to
was
see you again. When don't you when you catch us up? Begin wherever you want to, man. First of all, let me just say welcome home, and how's the last 2 weeks been for you?
well, the last week has been interesting. Um, Certainly not what I'm used to. Um, but before that, I was camping in the mountains in the west. That was nice. And then I opened my mouth, and then that kind of ruined the camping trip. So, uh,
Yeah, tell
so
us
here we
about
are.
that. I mean, we've become. I was always a fan of yours, of course, but even more so in the last week. How did all that kick off?
Well, so I was with that unit that you mentioned, and there was a photographer. If I remember correctly, he was Spanish, but he was a good guy, and he followed us around for a while, and took some pictures, and then he left and went off and did his own thing. He was a freelance photographer, and then he got a job at Le Figaro, and then he went back to that unit, and I think those guys were like, "Hey, isn't it crazy that Nate's cousin's the VP now?" And he was like, "Holy shit, what?" So he knew me, but he didn't. It's not like I walked around and introduced myself and said, "By the way, you know, this is who I'm related to." So a lot of people probably didn't know. And I generally like just kept my mouth shut about it. It's not really something you want to be telling people over there. Obviously,
Sure.
like my commander, I knew because I was like, I figured it was appropriate for him to know. And then obviously any of the American, Westerners that were right near me, knew because they knew what my last name was, right? They'd figure it out. So, um, anyway, yeah, you know, he called me, asked questions, and the thing about it is, look, I said what I said. Um, they were pointed words. I'm obviously kind of emotionally attached to the issue. Um, but my goal is not to be adversarial with the White House, for many reasons, not the least of which is that it's counterproductive. So, as it pertains to that issue, I'm kind of like, I mean, I get it. Everybody's interested. It's one of those like headline kind of quotes, but moving forward, I think the goal should be less adversarial and more just like, how do we get to where we, help these guys get what they need and solve the Russia problem as efficiently as possible. Um, and honestly, in this last week, I've seen what appears to be things moving in the right direction. As far as like, I was never under any illusion that like somebody's just gonna wave a flag and be like, I would really appreciate it if you guys stop shooting at each other, and then both sides go, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and then they just stop. It's gonna be a process, and this 30-day ceasefire is, I don't honestly expect Russia to honor it, but at least it shows at least it'll show which side is the impediment to peace and which side isn't, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and and honestly, what I saw of your comment was it was fairly innocuous. It was simply, hey, just because I'm related to the vice president doesn't mean that I share his politics, and it wasn't. And as you pointed out, that you've certainly been emotionally involved in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Involved. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't be without being emotionally involved.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I thought you were quite circumspect.
Well,
But
I think the headline grabbing one was the useful idiots one. I think that's the one that obviously is like, it sounds like you know a hateful thing. I'm not calling my cousin or the president an idiot. Um, but looking at that meeting and some of the concessions that were made, it's you know a lot of what politics are involved with is perceptions, and the perception, it was kind of scary at that moment in time, and that's what I was worried about, the perception of being perceived as that
sure,
title.
yeah.
So you know um
Has there been blowback since that?
I mean, I don't really talk to anybody, so you know what I mean. I was out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm planning on staying there. There's a there's kind of a, obviously on like Twitter, there's going to be there's going to be people that don't like you on Twitter no matter what the hell you say. So I don't really care if some idiot on Twitter's mad at me. Um, again, my only but like solitary goal really is to get those guys what they need, and quit. If we're going to allocate money, quit wasting it on shit that is not involved with killing people and breaking things. And that may sound like a cold statement, like an almost inhumane statement, but that's what war is. It's killing people and breaking their things. And you can't kind of half-ass support that effort. If that's what you're doing, if you're supporting their ability to defend themselves, that's what you're supporting, is their
Yeah.
ability to kill people and break shit. And I just think we need, like, I'm very critical of the Biden administration and the way they kind of figured out how to spend 60 billion to deliver 20. I don't know how they did that.
Yeah.
That's some funky math. But that's kind
And
of what,
drip feeding weapon systems,
and
giving the
and
Russians time to adapt.
talking about it beforehand, right? Like,
Yeah,
shut the hell up. Just one day, ATACM should have just shown up and nobody knew about it, and then it was there, right?
yeah,
So, keeping your mouth shut, delivering things in sufficient quantity and at the same time to actually have an impact is a big deal. And so I have significant complaints about them and did the entire time, but I didn't have the same last name as anybody in the White House, so it certainly wouldn't have been as interesting to anybody when I said
Yeah,
it.
Nate Harris or
Yeah,
Nate
yeah,
Biden.
yeah. If
Yeah.
maybe I should have changed my name to Nate, Nate Biden, and then fucking complained about it online. But so obviously that's why it's more topical that I made a complaint, and then I don't know. There's other reasons besides just getting those guys what they need that I think the Biden administration did a really piss poor job at explaining, and some of it is messaging. And I don't think the general mass of the American public realizes kind of the consequences of how it would affect American life if Russia were to, emerge successful. And it's not you would feel it, right? It would affect trade things. It would affect a lot of things. It would affect the dollar. So there's a lot of reasons besides my just emotional connection to it. And I don't think the Biden administration wasted 3 years trying to explain what those reasons are.
Yeah, I mean, what
So,
the reasons, obviously, you you took to heart because 3 years ago this month, almost to the week, maybe to the week, you showed up and I got a message from you, text message saying you were showing up in Lviv with a group of British grunts, and then a few days later I saw you in Kiev. So, and as
yeah,
I as,
yeah,
as we said, not inaccurately, you were one of the plaque holders of the Mozart Group. I mean, right at the beginning, with the Russians knocking on the gates, and we were setting up that what at the time seemed a hopelessly inadequate training course for these guys,
yeah.
IT workers, students, kids. Remember
Was that the
who?
5 day one?
Yeah, it was like 5 days, if that, right, Nate? I mean, it was it was
I
constantly.
can't do somewhere between 3 and 5 days. Nowhere near enough.
So I want to take a minute today to tell you guys about the Perfect Jean. I've been wearing them for a few weeks now and really enjoy them, and I just want to share it with our audience. Sometimes jeans have this problem where, you guys all have seen these skinny jeans that they like crush your balls and, it's just not comfortable to wear. Or the other way around, jeans are like too baggy. You have this sort of like diaper in your ass area, it looks like. So there are these problems that, different fits of different types of jeans have. And the Perfect Jean strives to fix that. Both the fit, but also the mobility, the maneuverability. It has a stretchy fabric. Like they say it's like yoga ready, but I would say it's athletics ready. Moving furniture, doing things around the house, you're not going to have that like super tight, like constricted fit that you feel like you're not going to be able to move around in. And there are over 400,000 people out there wearing these jeans at this point, so not all of them can be wrong. I hope you guys will go and check them out. So a few scenarios where you can wear these jeans and where they really come together. Everything from, doing yard work or doing things around your house. If you have to move furniture around or you have to do handiwork, they're perfectly comfortable. But you can wear them, getting your man spread on the subway, if that's your thing. So the Perfect Jean is great for all kinds of different environments, whether it's doing handiwork around the house or on the job or athletics. And we really hope you guys will go and check them out. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectjean.nyc or Google The Perfect Jean and use the code HOUSE15 for 15% off. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with promo code HOUSE15. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. So fuck your khakis and get the Perfect Jean.
So, I think it was either 3 or 5 days. I can't remember. We had just gotten to Kyiv, and then I had to turn right back around and go back to Lviv when we decided to do that training thing. But that's one of the things too. After I went and joined an infantry unit, which, looking back at my risk assessment, strategy, I probably have too high of a risk tolerance, especially for my age. But After doing that for a while, that's one of the things that I really started to think about was like, like, let's say I go out and every day, I'm engaging and eliminating 10 enemy, right? That would be a significant amount of people. The Russians don't care. They don't care, right? So ultimately, any personal contribution in that regard is somewhat limited. And, I am no super soldier, right? Like I was a basic infantryman and, wasn't in 20 years, but I do have some like management experience. And between the military and that management experience, I've running a business is no different than running a military. It's just that the problems are different. Um,
What,
so
let's stop you for a moment. So after the initial days of the Mozart Group, you went back to Lviv, and then you returned. And when did you join a Ukrainian infantry unit?
so I don't know if you recall, but I went with your guys and we went to Lviv and did that like 3 to 5 day training. And then
Yeah.
we came back to Kyiv and we did a few other things. And I mean, guys, this is a little long ago. It's hard to kind of keep track of exact specifics. But then I was actually scheduled to go home, right? So I did. I went back to the US for a couple weeks and then I came back again and then that's when I started getting linked up with that infantry unit was when I came back. And it was actually had something to do with I can't remember if the connection to that unit was through you or through some other people, but I think it may have been because we delivered some equipment out to Kyiv
Yeah.
to the unit. And they were kind of the same thing. They had a bunch of new guys that were like, you know, soccer hooligans the week before and good, eager kids. I say kids, they're, young enough to be my kids, but grown men. Um, and extremely eager. And I think we did some, again, like another short training evolution with those guys, like nowhere near enough. And then they were headed to Donbass and they kind of extended an invite, so to speak, for me to go. And I agreed to go. And that's kind of how I ended up out there and then decided to keep doing that. Um, but what I was saying though was like, we talk about sending equipment and technology and things like that over to Ukraine to support them. And information transfer is the oldest form of technology that humans possess, right? Just transferring information from one human being to another is as old as time. But when you're talking about doing that on an organized level, it has to be systematized and things like that. And one of the things I've noticed is that each unit kind of has its own training protocol for a new recruit. So like in the Marines, if you're going to go to 3-1, you go to boot camp first and then the School of Infantry. And then by the time you show up at 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, you have at least achieved a minimum basic standard of an infantryman. And, every squad leader will say, yeah, those guys are still idiots, but he's
They're
an idiot.
trained.
He's an idiot that knows how to load his magazine and get into a proper formation and move properly. And he knows basically how to communicate and things like that. And that takes a lot of stress and relief off of those individual unit commanders that they don't have to provide that basic level of training. And then also one of the things that kind of Marines are known for is their consistency. So let's say, an SF team calls for support or a QRF. And I've heard this many times is that when they hear it's Marine infantry coming, they know that it's consistently going to be good and that Marines are consistently going to smash the fuck out of everything they see. And so when they hear that, they're like, okay, that's a good thing. And it's not just good for those reasons. It's good because commanders know that when they pick on a unit to go do something, they know they're qualified to do at least X, Y, or Z. And I think because a lot of those training systems are left up to individual units, just like anything else, you're going to get some that are really good and some units that really take a, in-depth dive into that training program. And then you're going to get some units that either because they're complacent or don't know how, just produce troops that don't know what the hell they're doing, right? And that gets people killed. And in terms of training people, if we had in 2022 implemented an organized kind of train the trainer program, the Ukrainians would already be self-sufficient. So that's another kind of gripe I have with the Biden administration. It was an opportunity that was wasted to say, look, we're going to give you this aid, but but you have to systematize your training program, and we have to know that the people that are going to handle these weapons are handling it and using them as efficiently as possible. And that's not to discredit the Ukrainians or say they haven't done incredible things with the amount of resources they've had and the problem that they're facing. But maybe it is the Marine infantryman in me that just constantly thinks it's never fucking good enough and it can always be better.
What was it like in the unit that you were with, Nate? I mean, you talked about the very inadequate training that we were able to do. I mean, did the unit, what was your general feeling about its competence, about its ability to regenerate, the leadership?
I mean, like, obviously I think things could improve, right? But it's difficult to criticize them because, like, it's weird. I want to criticize them, but in a constructive way.
Sure.
I don't want it to seem like I'm beating them over the head. And they're very open about their shortcomings too, like internally. I don't want to specify them because obviously they're still, out there doing things. But one of the things that I've noticed that's very difficult to, how do I put this? So when it comes to mission planning, I think sometimes it needs to be more organized and structured. I think sometimes there's a lot of elements left out where if you were looking at it from the standpoint of a U.S. soldier, you'd be like, there's a lot of information missing here. And sometimes I think younger troops might think like, why the hell do I need to know what the back azimuth is back to friendly lines, right? Well, until it's nighttime and you don't know how to get back and things go wrong, right? So there's a lot of those little details in a U.S. mission plan that if everything goes well, 90% of that may be irrelevant to you.
Yeah.
But when things start going wrong, it's like, oh shit, I'm glad I had a pace plan, right? If the enemy kills one of your guys and takes the radio, a pace plan's a pretty big deal. And I've seen that happen, right? And some of the things like pace plan in general, that's one of those deals where military style comms, instead of just running with Motorola's, that could solve a lot of that, right? But you got 10 different units in an area and you got Motorola radios with 10 channels. And if you switch channels, you're on another unit's freak, right? So, the comms makes it difficult to make those planning things. And then I'll give you another example of one where an assault element kind of got dropped off at the wrong place. And there was some kind of confusion in telling the guys where to go. And they ended up not going the right way, right? And I remember I still carry a compass and ranger beads on my gear anytime I leave the house and I'm really going to do something, right? And I'm constantly looking on a map like, okay, what's the magnetic azimuth to get to this next safe place and things like that. And that was one of those situations where had it been a U.S. squad, everybody has a Kamanga fucking compass on their shit, hanging off their chest. And you could have just told somebody, just go, 270 degrees for 400 meters and you're going to be right where you need to be. And there's no thought, there's no confusion, discussion, right? And it just happens. And by virtue of that confusion and those guys not going where they went, things ended badly, right? So it's little details like that you don't think of. And even now in modern times, things like land nav, people go, why would I need that? We have GPS. Well, it doesn't always work, right? And in that case, maybe that GPS was getting jammed there. Maybe that's why they went the wrong way, because they had their little tablet that they were working off of that was GPS based. So those little details that most people would think, well, just teach them how to shoot a gun and teach them how to dig a fighting hole and they're good to go.
You're right.
That's not enough, right? Like I can teach you how to shoot a rifle in a day. But that's not enough when you got to start moving around and doing things like that. And that, when I say communications, I'm not talking about radios. It's how to speak to each other to deliver a message as quickly and concisely as possible.
Were you, were you the only American in the unit, Nate?
No, but there wasn't very many. There was just a handful of Westerners. Normally it was about 3 of us, and then guys would kind of come and go, and do different things. But it was primarily a Ukrainian unit.
Can you talk a little bit about, so when you first joined the unit, what were you guys doing? I mean, where roughly where were you, and what was like a typical day like?
When we first joined the unit, they were not actually part of the Ukrainian army proper yet, right? They were one of those like militia groups, so to speak. So what they were doing was more like going out and finding things and then reporting that to proper army units. And the reason that worked that way is because you couldn't get organic artillery as a part of your unit unless you were part of the Ukrainian army, right? So you could work adjacent to other, actual army units. And then what happened is, the battalion commander at the time, which is Davinci, that's how the unit got its name.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So, and he was like the equivalent of a Medal of Honor recipient in Ukraine, right? Like he had the nation's highest award. So he wanted his own organic artillery. So then they ended up getting rolled up under another unit. But prior to that, it was like a lot of drone stuff and just finding targets and relaying those to bigger units, and then letting them smash the hell out of stuff with artillery. And then as we got rolled up into the army, it's like, okay, now you're an infantry unit. And I was like, well, things are going to get a little bit more spicy. Because they're going to ask, once you get tasked with starting to take positions, that's a different ball of wax altogether. So then that's what they asked us to start doing. So things got a little bit interesting.
I got a question. What does it mean to take up positions? I'm sorry.
No, that means there's bad guys in a spot and you have to go kill them and occupy the space that they're currently occupying.
Got it.
So.
Sorry, Andy.
No,
Yeah, so were you rotating out of the trenches and then back to the rear? I mean, what was
yeah, I mean, so like if you look at it, it's almost like the US military, where you have like a deployment system, right? So, a unit will go to the front and you'll get assigned a position that maybe it's already held by Ukrainians and you're just relieving guys, or maybe there's Russians in it and they want you to go kick them out and then hold it, right? So you go on your deployment and then you drive out to whatever area of the front they were sending you to, and you'd either occupy your position or take your position. And then within that deployment, you would have like a little rotation system where you might spend it, like 1 day on, 2 days off, right? And you'd kind of take turns doing that. And each unit has their own little different kind of system of rotations where they would put guys out there. And that's what you do until you either got relieved by another unit, or unfortunately you experienced enough casualties where you kind of had to pull off the line and then go get kind of, new recruits and repopulate and retrain and then get back after it. So it's I don't want to give the impression that you're just sitting there in a hole in a gunfight 365 days a year. That's not, if that's your life, it's not going to be a very long life.
Yeah.
So they are, at least in that unit, they did go to pretty good lengths to make sure guys weren't getting burnt out in positions and just sitting there, because it will wear you down. I mean, you can't just stay there in that environment for too long.
How long were you with them total?
With them, from the time I left you until just recently. So, 2 years. Yeah. I mean, there was a couple times where I did kind of bounce around. Like I met some guys in a drone unit, and I was like, hey, why don't you just what they were pretty good dudes and like really fucking adept with that drone stuff. So I kind of talked those guys into letting me almost be like a foreign exchange student with them for a while. You know what I mean? So I was like, it wasn't very long, but I went with them and just kind of, tried to see what they were doing and pick their brains on their drone end. And they're very gracious about it. I mean, they're very eager to share information but it's interesting that a lot of the developments and like TTPs are happening at an individual unit level and not, I mean, I don't speak the language, so there's a lot of that I miss, right?
Yeah.
It didn't seem like you had TTPs being driven from top down, where if one unit learns it, one unit learns something valuable and then it goes up the chain and then gets disseminated back down to everybody. Didn't seem like that was happening as efficiently as it would in the US. But then again, I could be wrong, right? Like there's certain elements of stuff that I don't have access to.
So Nate, you won't mind me saying, but you're in your 40s, right?
I'm 45
So
years old. Yeah.
yeah, so how were you integrated into this unit? Were you at squad level? And I mean, were there enough English speakers in the unit?
There was
Kind
some
of
English
bounce
speakers in
around?
the unit. So typically I was a machine gunner in the Marines. So I'm pretty handy with machine guns and trying to explain to a layperson what like grazing enfilade fire is confusing enough in English. It's extra confusing in a foreign language. Um, so, um, but what we did is because like, if you're assaulting a position, right, where you're having to communicate dynamically and, you know, scream orders rapidly change and things like that, that's not a good place to have somebody who's speaking their second language try to communicate with the one idiot that came over from America. And so because I was good with machine guns, I typically ended up in that support by fire role. Um, because you don't really have to know, there's not a lot of communication. It's like, hey, suppress this area. Yeah, roger that. And then you'd
Sure.
suppress, or if the enemy advanced, it's pretty easy to know what to do. It's like, well, there they are, do that thing you do with the machine guns. And then we'd usually have like the one of the English speaking Ukrainians in the unit that would be our chaperone that would communicate with headquarters on the radio. And then, that guy didn't really have to do anything except keep communicating with them. And typically, like I said, the machine gun thing's pretty easy to do. And sometimes we were doing support by fire with just rifles because we didn't have machine guns all the time. So
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. What kind of machine guns did they have when they had them?
we started out with just PKMs, and then we got some French 50 calibers, right? A couple of them. And I remember when they got them, I was actually back in the States. And these were the old style. They're not like the A1s where you don't have to do the headspace and timing. So these were the old ones. And I remember sending messages and I was like, do not fucking shoot them, right? Like, wait until I get back. And they shot them. And they had problems like from that point on. I think they didn't, I don't know. Maybe they could have been screwed up and old to begin with.
Yeah.
But we got them to cycle, but they were never quite that, quite running the way Amadus should properly run. And then we ended up getting some A1s later, which were great. But another thing is like, you have to run the barrel that's assigned to that receiver on those A1s. It's got two barrels and you can't mix and match them and just swap them out. And that was one of the things in the battalion. The battalion got a bunch of them and all of them were having problems. And I was like, all right, look at the serial number on the barrel. And I'll look at the serial number on the receiver. Is it the same number? And they're like, no. And I was like, all right, take all the fucking barrels off right now before we break these things. And I mean, the M2 is an incredible weapon, but she's a little bit
Finicky.
yeah, she can be, you know what I mean? But as long as you treat her right, she's great. And then we ended up getting a few Mark 19s, which are, God, I love that thing. But I don't like carrying it. And that's, I finally got to use a Mark 19 in an environment where it was like appropriate, right? Where it was like, that's the perfect place for Mark 19s is over there.
Yeah.
And it was also the place where I'm now in my 40s, and you can't afford to drive a vehicle anywhere where you can use the Mark 19. So it's like, God damn it, you know what I mean? Now I got to carry this heavy bitch everywhere. Um, so, but if you can get that thing in a position and know how to use it, it makes a difference for sure. So I ended up like, that's another thing too, is like, you got to be careful at telling them what you're good at or demonstrating what you're good at, because we did use the Mark 19 one time to great success. And then the Mark 19 became the solution for everything. And I'm like, whoa, slow down. You know what I mean? I'm not carrying this bitch everywhere. You know what I mean? like, let's not get carried away. But, that, after a while, it just gets to a point where when you're in that support role, some of the guys you're supporting are in significantly more danger than you are.
Mhm.
So as heavy as that piece of shit is,
Sure.
you really feel obligated to get it to where it needs to be and get it up and running. And
Yeah, it's a perfect role for you, really. I mean, given I mean, given your age, given your expertise, and given the fact that they
no,
did
no,
have heavy
that
machine
that
guns.
that, that was it, within that unit. That's where I belonged, right? Like that was the right place to have me. Um, and then after a while, I started training the guys on the Mark 19. Again, Mark 19 is a simple machine itself, but understanding the mill system and the T&E and how to use it and how to calculate it, and then things like time of flight. You can't shoot where the guys are. You got to shoot where they're going to be, because it's it 2 clicks. It's 15 seconds of flight time. You can cover quite a bit of ground in 15 seconds. So, but those guys are quick studies and they're eager, and they're like sponges, man. They want to soak up as much stuff as they possibly can. So
What were
teaching.
your impressions? What
Oh,
were your
sorry.
impressions of the Russians? I know in the first year of the war, the Ukrainians were very scornful of the Russian infantry.
Uh,
Their general competence.
I
Did that change?
look. There's always the kind of natural dehumanization of your enemy, which I completely understand. But if you're being logical and you're trying to you have an opponent, you have to realize like they don't want to die either. Um, their ability to deduce things and calculate things are just as good as yours are. You know what I mean? And you're much better off if you presume your enemy is better at doing this than you are. Um, that will affect your planning if you think these guys are really good. If you think they're idiots, you'll wander right into a trap.
Mm.
So it's like my outlook on it was always assume that the enemy element that you're going up against is the best they have, and treat them like they're better than you are. And you'll tend not to forget as many things or take as many shortcuts if you do it that way. But if I'm giving an honest assessment about the Russians, some of them are terrible troops. Like some of them are just cannon fodder that they throw out there. But trying to paint the Russian military with a broad brush and just saying they all suck. If they all suck that bad, what are they still doing in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Why haven't you pushed them out? And they're very much, kind of in the same vein of the Ukrainians. They have really effective units, and then they have, some pretty dog shit units. The problem is you don't know which one you're coming up against on any given day, so you may as well just assume that it's their best and plan accordingly. And
They
that's
were
another.
especially good with artillery. I mean, from the beginning of the war, they could bring down artillery very quickly.
They could, yeah, yeah. Artillery is something that they will not hesitate to use. Mortars are also, they got really good mortarmen. I think on both sides of the conflict, you probably have some of the best mortarmen and some of the best artillerymen on earth right now.
Yeah.
They've certainly had enough practice. I think the Russians suffer a little bit from the same communication problem, right? I don't think they have enough like military style communication to kind of go around. And that sometimes kind of saved us a little bit, because there were times where I was like, it's coming any minute, and it never it never came, you know.
Yeah.
So, and the only thing I can kind of chalk that up to is the message didn't get to where it needed to be, or there was just another higher priority target somewhere else. It's hard to know, you know what I mean? It's really hard to kind of figure out why something didn't happen. But I have heard, you know, that like we've intercepted communications that they were using, and they were like, you know, civilian radio. They weren't frequency hopping or encrypted. So some of those units are using just civilian radios, which that kind of indicates to me that there's not enough real military comms to go around. And then I've also found places that have been liberated where I saw old style comm wire laid everywhere. So in some places they're using field phones, which is not necessarily a bad idea, but
No.
you know, with as much artillery is going around, those wires are going to get cut fairly often, you know, which interrupts their ability to call in for that kind of support. But it's a
Nate,
weird.
what about, I'm
Hmm?
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's a weird conflict. You know what I mean? Like, in some ways, you're surprised in multiple different directions, right? You're surprised by how seemingly inefficient the Russian army can be, and then in other areas, you're surprised. You're like, man, they didn't know they could pull that off. So, you know, it's a weird mix.
Pockets of unexpected excellence,
Yeah,
just
I mean, look, it's
just when you don't need it.
yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, you know, you got to think that somebody in there knows what they're doing, right? Like, I think there are dumb Russians. Some of them are high-ranking officials in the Russian army, but Russians are not by definition dumb people, right? They're really smart people, and it's honestly it helps you more to recognize their intelligence than it does to constantly speak about their stupidity, right? If you think they're stupid, you'll take them lightly and lighter than you should, right? So you need to recognize, like, I get the dehumanization thing. I get making jokes on social media and making fun of the other side. But if you're a planner, you need to plan like they're dangerous, because they are. I mean, they're good at a lot of things.
Nate, what was medical support like? I mean, I asked that because I know solely during the first year of the war, the Ukrainians were struggling with having enough trained medics. I mean, how was it in your unit?
Um, the the concept of training medics, that got corrected fairly quickly. The problem then became certain supply issues like whole blood products, and you know, like one thing that I was never able to get my hands on was an easy IO kit, um, which could have saved a lot of people, right? Like, you know, sometimes you just can't start an IV on somebody. So little things like that. But I mean, you also have to think it genuinely is a supply and demand issue. There's a lot of demand for medical kit, and it's getting used up. It's not like it's just sitting in a stockpile, right? It's getting used constantly. Um, and then the the main issue with medical that I see now is evacuation. So a lot of those areas where guys get wounded, it's just really hard to get a vehicle in there, and sometimes there's just not enough time to, you know, carry a litter out, or you can't carry a litter out because you can't move quick enough to avoid the gauntlet of artillery and mortar fire that's going to come your way if you try. Um, and there's times we did try and it didn't work, and you know, we just, you know, couldn't do it. So evacuation and whole blood product, like if you can't take the time, having whole blood products in a lot of cases will keep guys alive long enough to figure something else out.
Yeah.
So, you know, if there's a system to get whole blood products all the way up to the zero line in an efficient manner, it save a lot of lives. And I did back away from the front once my cousin got the shoulder tap to be the VP, just because, you know, I was like, well, I need to, but you know, so I don't know if anything's dramatically changed in that time frame or not, but I haven't heard anything that like the situation's improving there. But
Yeah.
um,
It's interesting, isn't it? I remember when, you know, just during the first year when we were trying to teach them about casualty collection points, and they were saying, Are you crazy? If we set up a casualty collection point,
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
gonna get schwacked.
That's insanity. Yeah, you can't.
Yeah. You
You,
you you you've got to evacuate the guy from point of injury, as you know, and all the way back, and
all the way,
that's
yeah, all the
yeah,
way outside of artillery range is where your CCP needs to be, and it's really hard to do. You know what I mean? Like there's legitimately not really an answer for it. Um, a lot of those areas are just getting laced up with like, you know, ATGMs all the time, right? You hear them whizzing over your head all the time. So you're like, dude, if we bring in an M113 to this spot, it's just going to get smacked and we're going to have more casualties, right?
yeah.
And still no evac, right? So it's one of those shitty decisions you have to make, but you're like, we can't bring a vehicle up here. And this guy needs it. We can't do it. We got to try to figure out another way, or just keep him alive long enough until we can figure something else out. And it doesn't always work. And it's a shit spot to be in, but that's the reality of it.
Nate, what's your what's kind of your I was going to say prediction. There's no other way to put it, but I mean, what do you think will make a good peace deal at this point in the war? I know earlier on when you were talking about your comments and the fact that you didn't want to be too critical of the White House because it wasn't about that, but and I know you tried to make a constructive comments about what you envision a working plan to look like. But do you mind going over that for us?
Unfortunately, I don't think there is really a there's no lasting peace plan that doesn't involve significant teeth, because I don't think Putin has any. I don't think he has any. Like for me, that I have no illusions about the fact that Putin intends on continuing this at some point, right? I think the only reason Putin might be, amenable to a temporary peace plan or something that kind of halts hostilities is because, his industry and his forces need to rearm and regroup. I think in a they have a similar necessity to do so that the Ukrainians do. Um, like you don't see any more MTLBs on the line anymore, right? That's a significant thing, that the goddamn Russian army ran out of MTLBs, right? That's like they had thousands.
Audience, you want to just explain what MTLB is?
MTLB is like it's kind of like the Russian equivalent to what we would look at as, just an armored personnel carrier, and kind of colloquially we refer to them as like a combat taxi. So if you're going to send assault troops up to the front, you might send BMPs to kind of give them some fire support, and then MTLBs with a bunch of dudes in the back, and they pile out, and you know what I mean? It's just or casualty evacuation, right? So you might just send them up there. They're cheap, not particularly heavily armored or armed, but it's armored enough to protect you from like small arms, and you can haul ass up to the front line, pick up a casualty, turn around and haul ass back. And the Russian army had thousands of those things at the beginning of the war, and you're seeing the Russians use donkeys to replace them. Yeah, I mean, I don't know I don't know how wide scale it is, but you are starting to see videos that the Russians are putting online of them using donkeys to bring supplies up to the front and bring them back. That was the typical role of like the MTLB all the way up to this point. So you're starting to see them less and less. There might be a few of them still out there. I'm not saying they have zero, but if guys are having to resort to using pack animals, it's almost like that scene in Patton, in the movie Patton, where George C. Scott says, "You know how I knew it was the end for them? It was the carts." And then he goes into some diatribe about how he was present with Napoleon, but and that's like when I started seeing the donkeys, that's the scene, the movie scene I thought of, and kind of internally was quoting, was like, Jesus Christ, how bad does it have to be where you're like, I'll get on a donkey and go out and FPV drone land and make a resupply run. The logistics problems have to be pretty bad for it to get to that point. So I think the Russians do need a break, but I don't think that their long-term intentions are to pause, right? Like it's just a halftime show for them. And I mean, and when you really,
Sorry, go on.
And when you really look at it, this is not a 3-year-old conflict, right? This conflict's been going on for a long time, even before 2014, right? Before 2014, it was the old school kind of, I know it's not Soviet anymore because the Soviet Union was gone, but they were using those same tactics of kind of trying to destabilize the government and, you know, using subterfuge and propaganda to kind of turn Ukraine into a vassal state. That pissed them off. So then they said, okay, we'll create a little rebellion in the East, which was full of Russian troops, right? Those weren't like rebels from Ukraine. Some of them were, you know what I mean? But there was Russian special forces in there doing things, which Russia denied and is obviously bullshit. How did just random rebels get a hold of Russian artillery pieces, right? It doesn't make any sense. Like, where'd the BMPs come from? So obviously that was a Russian operation. That didn't work. They took Crimea, things still didn't change, right? Ukraine's still progressively moving more and more towards the West. And finally, I think they just kind of jumped the shark in 2022, but the conflict's significantly older than that. And it just escalated from, can we do this the easy way? And they kept kind of realizing, no, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. So they kept doing it the harder and harder and harder way. And now we're in a full scale invasion. And, I think if there's a momentary peace, there will be another sugar in the basement moment, and they'll blame it on the Ukrainians, and that will be their excuse to kick it off again when they're ready. So, the only thing I think they respect is force or the credible threat of force that's insurmountable. And if they don't see that, then they'll do whatever they want.
Yeah, two great points you drew from that, Nate, or rather I drew from from what you just said. One is the point that lost in this whole strange conversation now about peace negotiations not involving the Ukrainians, et cetera, lost in that morass is the fact that the Russians are hurting badly. Their economy is hurting. The military has been decimated. And, the number of vehicles that they have lost is just a staggering amount. And to say, hey, they have plenty left now, it no longer applies. Their industry obviously cannot keep up with the scale of losses.
Right.
The war is very unpopular at home. It's too easy to forget that by focusing on Ukraine's problems. And the other part that anyone who's dealt with the Russians knows is true is the fact that no, they do not respect a desire for peace. They don't care about that. They
No.
they respect fear, and Putin especially.
No, but look, they also respond to fear as well, right? Deterrence works. It works. It worked during the Cold War, but
Yeah.
that deterrence has to be credible and powerful enough to be effective as a deterrent, right? And it has to be powerful and effective enough to act as a deterrent 5 years from now after Russia's had the opportunity to kind of rebuild and rearm themselves and implement their lessons learned over the course of this conflict. So it's a significant investment to keep them where they are. Because, if you take Ukraine right now and we just let's say there was a peace and we just say, okay, good, you guys are good, and we just leave, right? And their military kind of stays the same way it is right now. Well, Russia's is not going to stay the same way it is. They're going to continue to improve. They are smart, so they will implement those lessons learned. They will rebuild, and they'll come back, stronger than they are today. So, whatever the teeth is that you put in there, and I'm not a strategist, right? Like, I'm really not. So I kind of loathe trying to say what the specifics are what that exactly needs to be. But it needs to be something that's strong enough to where, whatever Russia's going to have 5 years from now, it's strong enough to make them pause and say, it's not worth it. Right.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what that looks like. We have guys with stars on their collars in the Pentagon. They need to determine that. But if we are going to say, and again, this is this is all outside my wheelhouse necessarily, but if we are going to say, hey, we're going to sign this peace plan and we're going to back it if Russia breaks it, whatever that backing is has to have clearly defined strategic goals attached to it. That if they break it, what does that mean? What are we going to do? What does that mean for Russia? Do we push them all the way back? Does that now mean that we're going to kick you out of Crimea? And whatever those goals are, it needs to be something that's more than an executive order. It needs to be like signed into law almost, because it has to, like the bad part about this and what I don't want to have happen, and I think this is bad for our like long-term, foreign policy reputation, is that if we say, if America says we have your back, we got to have it, right? And the first time you bail out of that, the effort that it takes to get your reputation back with other countries that you may need to be in that area of the world is Herculean, right? You can damage your reputation in 10 seconds and it takes decades to build it back up. So that's part of it where I look at like, when people say, what is America's purpose in all this? Like some of it is just salvaging our own reputation or just maintaining our own reputation. We said as a country, we got your back, more than once, right? We said it in the Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah.
And then we said it in 2022 again, even if it was a different president that's in there right now. The rest of the world doesn't care that there was a administration change, right? They just look at it and say, well, America's wishy-washy and you can't rely on them.
Yeah.
So
And containing an adversary is an important strategic goal.
no,
I mean,
100%.
it's
this is one of those things that I am upset with the Biden administration, because they did not clearly define to the American people why Russia is our adversary,
yeah.
right? And they did a very good job talking about kind of the human interest part of it. But there's a certain amount of the population that is more transactional. I'm not saying that as a negative thing, right? They just look at it and go, what's the cost benefit analysis of why we're
in purely financial terms, which
well,
is
not even necessarily just financial terms, but like, okay, well, how does this affect, like, why is this beneficial to America? They all, a certain portion of the population that understands, like, I get it, killing people's bad, but there's lots of evil in the world. Why is it in America's interest to be involved in this particular part of the world? And I don't think they did a good enough job. And the Russian propaganda machine was constantly churning out bullshit during the entire conflict. And, they're not really responding to it effectively. They just go, it's sad, but that's not what motivates them to make a decision, right? And that, like, it's not good or bad. I think that's what's great about our country, is you kind of have those two conflicting things kind of working against each other, and somewhere in the middle is where the right answer lies. If you're purely emotional, that's a bad place to be. That's how I made some pointed comments about my cousin the other day, and it got me a lot of unwanted attention. But if you're purely clinical, then sometimes you kind of lose your humanity. So I think that's what makes us good as a country. We can be that marketplace of ideas and figure out a middle ground that tends to work. And we end up doing the right thing, maybe after we've done the wrong thing over and over again. But like Winston Churchill said,
Yeah. Can be relied upon to do the right thing after exhausting every other possibility.
Yeah. I couldn't remember the exact quote, but as long as at the end of the day we do the right thing, I'm happy. And honestly, like, I'm not in a position to move the needle or affect policy or anything like that. But if I see the country doing something and I think it's wrong, I think we're moving in the wrong direction, I think it's not only our right, but kind of our obligation to speak up. And in this particular case, and in this particular political issue, when I do it, it tends to gain some attention. So,
well, you continuously underplay yourself, Nate. I'll tell you that. And when I first met you, and we were talking over a coffee in Kiev, and asked you to help with training, I remember you saying, "Hey, I can't remember much about being a Marine at all," and yet I will say this: once you threw yourself into it, it came very naturally to you. So
Well,
um,
like I've said in some other publications that that's a testament to the Marine Corps, honestly. That's one of those things, I hadn't seen a Mark 19 in 20 something years. And I got one delivered to me in a box, set it up on its tripod, and the following day was engaging targets 2 kilometers away that I couldn't see with a compass and a fucking bubble level. And that says something about the Marine Corps', professionalism and their level of training. I wouldn't have thought I could do that, right? I wouldn't have thought that it would get back into my head. But, when you have some surly sergeant being like, "Oh, you're tired? Shut the fuck up and do it again anyway." You know what I mean? That's what happens is 20 years later, you can still remember to do that. And that was it's one of the things that's kind of weighed on me a little bit, and what's made me think, if we're not giving those Ukrainian troops, those Ukrainian conscripts, that level of training, we're doing them a disservice. And it's something that can be achieved. It's hard to set up the infrastructure for it, but it can be done, and it kind of must be done. And if you're not doing it, you're not giving them everything that you can, and that's unacceptable to me. So
I got a question. How many weeks are like new Ukrainian recruits getting in terms of training before they're?
man, I don't think that there's a consistent answer to that.
Oh wow.
I don't know. Like I know sometimes there was some examples of guys that got like maybe 2 weeks and then thrown out there. And I'm not trying to cause a big stink or do anything like that. There is a certain necessity involved,
Yeah.
with the Ukrainians, and I think they genuinely want to do everything they can. But I think that there's no singular like training kind of pipeline, and there needs to be, which is also very difficult to set up because you got an enemy that's slinging fucking missiles at everything strategically valuable. So you'd have to kind of break that apart and have like a bunch of little small training things, and then maintaining a consistency between each little individual pipeline would be difficult. But it's not as difficult as going to the front lines, and fighting with 2 weeks of training. It's certainly not as difficult as that. And if we're going to expect guys to go do that, then to go into that hell, then the least we could do is give them every available bit of information that we can. So
well, Nate, thanks so much. I talked about you underplaying yourself as a trainer of Ukrainians, but you've also underplayed yourself in you're talking about your recent comments. I would say you're an articulate and credible voice, and especially with your background. I'm not even talking about your relatives in the White House. I'm just talking about the fact that it's you're the right person in the right moment to say the things that you have said, because people cannot argue with. You're getting embarrassed now because, of course, we don't flatter one another as Marines. But thank you anyway. That was that was it was great seeing you again, and I can't let you go without thanking you for your statements that helped me win that lawsuit against our friend Michael Ryan Burke. Do you remember the
yeah,
rape,
no,
the rapist?
yeah, I remember. Yeah, no, I mean, like, it's just, I don't know, like the questions, I was asked some questions, and that's the truth, and I was like, well, then, yeah, I'll make a statement on that. So that's.
Yeah, he's unfortunately he escaped justice, and he is back in the States and doing a job that would horrify you to know. But at least at least we did the right thing at the time. So I appreciate that.
No problem. So no, you guys, thanks for having me. I do kind of got to get running. I
Yeah,
got
absolutely.
later today. So, but I appreciate it.
Nate, appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All the best, Nate. Drive
right.
safely.
All right. Thanks.
Hey guys, it's Jack. I just want to talk to you for a moment about how you can support the show if you've been watching it, enjoying it, but you'd like to get a little bit more involved and help us continue to do this. You can check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/theteamhouse. And for $5 a month, you can get access to all of these episodes of The Team House ad-free. The same goes with our affiliated podcast, Eyes On, with Andy Milburn, Jason Lyons, Mick Mulroy. That one, you will also get all of those episodes ad-free. And you support the channel and the show, and we really appreciate it. The Patreon members are literally what has helped this company, this small business survive, especially during our early years. And you are what continues to help this thing going, even as we navigate the turbulent world of YouTube advertising. So we really appreciate all of you guys. There's going to be a link down in the description to that Patreon page. And there is also going to be a link to our new merch shop. So if you guys want to go and get some Team House merchandise, we got stickers and we also have patches. And I should mention, if you sign up for Patreon at $10 a month, we will mail you this patch as well. So we really appreciate that. But they're also for sale on the merch shop. And additionally, they got t-shirts up there, water bottles, a tote bag, coffee mugs, all that good stuff. So please go and check them out and support the show. We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.